Hi, my name's Ann Haber, and today I'm going to be demonstrating the anatomy of the heart. The heart is a muscular pump which is located in the mediastinum. The mediastinum is a body region that is bordered by the lungs laterally, by the sternum anteriorly, and by the vertebral column posteriorly. The heart rests upon the diaphragm with its apex where it's pointing towards the left. So this region here is the mediastinum, and it houses the heart and the great blood vessels of the thorax. The heart is surrounded by a sac, which is made of serous membranes. The serous membrane that sits right on top of the surface of the heart is called visceral pericardium. The serous membrane that forms the exterior of the sac is called the parietal pericardium. So together, the visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium form the pericardial sac. When learning anatomy on any model, it's very important to be able to determine what is anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral of that model. So the anterior surface of the heart is very easy to tell because it has these structures that look like saddlebags. Those are called auricles, and they are on the outer surface of the superior chambers of the heart, which are called atria. You can also see pretty clearly these large vessels here. These are in a group referred to as great blood vessels of the thorax. And you can also see these blood vessels that are bringing oxygen and glucose to the heart, which, as mentioned, is a muscular pump and requires a good supply of oxygen and glucose. And then you can also see veins on the anterior surface of the heart as well. The posterior surface of the heart is almost entirely taken up with the left atrium or the left superior chamber of the heart. If you move a little more laterally or to the right, you can see the right atrium in a posterior view. And in a posterior view, you just don't see as much of the muscular ventricles as you do in the anterior view. So the external anatomy, you see the superior chambers and the inferior chambers, the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. And you also see some great blood vessels. You see the pulmonary trunk, which bifurcates into the left and right pulmonary artery. You see the aorta. You see the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, which are bringing their blood to the right atrium. And you can, on the posterior view, again, see the atria of the heart. And you also get a pretty decent view, depending on the model, of the trachea and the primary bronchi and the esophagus. Okay, so we've gotten a look at the external anatomy of the heart. Now we're going to take a look at the internal anatomy of the heart. And just to clarify something, as we teach anatomy of the heart and blood flow through the heart, we normally teach sequentially. We teach blood goes from the right side of the heart out to the lungs, and then comes back to the left side of the heart, and then goes out to the whole body. And that is true, but it's important for you to know that in reality, the cardiac cycle is such that blood will be pumped from the atria to the ventricles, and from the ventricles out into the great blood vessels at the same time, not sequentially. The left and right sides of the heart pump at the same time, okay? Not sequentially, as I'm about to demonstrate, okay? So The blood will enter the right atrium from the superior aspects of the body by way of the superior vena cava. Blood will enter the right atrium from the inferior aspects of the body by way of the inferior vena cava. And this blood is deoxygenated blood. This is blood that's coming back from the cells of the body after they have already done cellular respiration. The cells have used the oxygen, and this is deoxygenated blood. So other structures that we can see inside the right atrium include this depression in the wall of the right atrium, and that depression is called fossa ovalis. Okay, and in some models, you can also see where the coronary sinus empties into the right atrium. Some models you can see this, some models you can't. This large vessel here is the coronary sinus, and it does bring its blood back to the right atrium. And in this model, you actually can see that. There is the entry of the coronary sinus. Okay. The left and right side of the heart are divided by walls. In anatomical terms, a wall is a septum. And so there is a septum between the right and left ventricles. And there is a septum between the right and left atria. Okay? So this would be the interatrial septum. And this would be the interventricular septum. It's a muscular wall between the ventricles. So blood has now arrived at the right atrium and is going to pass into the right ventricle by way of this valve here. And this valve is called the tricuspid valve. Blood will then pass from the right ventricle into the pulmonary trunk. And it has to pass through a valve again, and that valve is very appropriately named the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary trunk bifurcates or divides into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. Pulmonary means of or related to the lungs, and that means those blood vessels are going out to the lungs. Remember, I mentioned that this is deoxygenated blood, so that blood is heading out to the vasculature of the lungs, and there the blood will become oxygenated. And the oxygenated blood will travel back to the heart, back to the superior left chamber of the heart, which is the left atrium. So we see the left pulmonary veins and the right pulmonary veins. And in posterior view, it's much easier to see the right pulmonary veins and the left pulmonary veins dumping into the left atrium. So now we have oxygenated blood in the left atrium, and that blood is going to pass from the left atrium to the left ventricle through a valve again. The valve is called the mitral or bicuspid valve. Blood will then pass from the left ventricle into this great blood vessel here, which is the aorta, and it's a little bit easier to see on this model. So here we are in the left ventricle, and blood is going to pass into this valve here, okay? And that valve is opening up into this great blood vessel here, which is the aorta. The aorta is a very large artery, and it branches into many, many smaller systemic arteries, and that vessel is taking blood and oxygen to the body tissues. There's a structure here externally between the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. It's called the ligamentum arteriosum, and it is an important structure in fetal circulation, which we'll talk about later. Teachers will classify the valves between the atria and the ventricles as atrioventricular valves. between the atria and the ventricles, sorry. The atrioventricular valves. And the valves which connect the ventricles to the great blood vessels are referred to as the semilunar valves. Most of the time we refer to them as their names. So instead of calling them the right atrioventricular valve, we would call it the tricuspid valve. Instead of calling it the semilunar valve, we would call it the pulmonary valve. As mentioned, the heart is a muscular pump. There are some ridges of muscle in the ventricles and in the atria. The ridges of muscle in the ventricles are called trabeculae carnii. And there are these muscular bands that you see in the anterior wall of the atrium. These are called pectinate muscles. They are present in the anterior walls of both atria, but we are visualizing them here in the left atrium. There are some enlarged portions of the trabeculae carnii that you will see in the ventricles, and they are attached to the valves, the atrioventricular valves. The atrioventricular valves have these thread-like structures called chordae tendineae, and those chordae tendineae attach to the papillary muscles that are within the ventricular chambers. And the purpose of those papillary muscles, as the ventricles contract, we don't want those valves to flip inside out. The papillary muscles apply a little pressure to the valve leaflets so they're not able to turn inside out. As mentioned, the heart is a muscular pump, and as such, it requires oxygen and glucose so that the muscle cells can make ATP and they can contract. Okay, so the coronary arteries are the blood vessels that bring oxygenated blood and glucose to the heart muscle itself. The coronary arteries arise from the base of the aorta, and this part of the aorta is referred to as the ascending aorta. So the coronary arteries come off of the base of the ascending aorta. Okay, so the right coronary artery is logical and easy to see. The right coronary artery is the very first artery off of the ascending aorta. The right coronary artery brings oxygenated blood to the right ventricle and the right atrium. The left coronary artery, sometimes referred to as the left main coronary artery, it's harder to see where it takes off from the base of the aorta because the pulmonary trunk is in the way. If we removed the pulmonary trunk, we would see that the left main coronary artery or the left coronary artery also arises from the base of the aorta and the ascending aorta. And it comes out from behind the pulmonary trunk, and it then branches into two major arteries, this one and this one. Okay, so this one is referred to clinically most often as the left anterior descending artery. The textbooks will often refer to it as the anterior interventricular artery. The other branch off the left main coronary artery or the left coronary artery is the circumflex artery, and it's easy to remember because it circles around towards the back. Okay, so it circles around towards the posterior aspect of the heart. So these are the main arteries. Those arteries and their branches are bringing oxygenated blood and glucose to the heart muscle. The heart muscle is then going to return, the heart is going to then return deoxygenated blood back to where all the deoxygenated blood goes, which is the right atrium. Okay, so we also see various veins associated with the heart muscle. All of these veins carrying deoxygenated blood will converge upon this very large blood vessel located posteriorly, this large vein located posteriorly, and it's called the coronary sinus. And the coronary sinus, as we mentioned before, does empty into the right atrium. So let's review how blood circulates through the heart. Blood enters the right atrium from the superior portion of the body through the superior vena cava. Blood enters the right atrium from the inferior portions of the body through the inferior vena cava. Blood will pass from the right atrium into the right ventricle by way of the tricuspid valve. The blood will then pass from the right ventricle into the pulmonary trunk by way of the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary trunk will bifurcate into the left and right pulmonary arteries, which are carrying blood out to the lungs. So a good rule of thumb is that arteries go away from the heart. Even though these are called arteries, they are carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Okay, so and they are moving away from the heart. So the pulmonary arteries are going to go take their blood out to the lungs. The blood is then going to become oxygenated in the lungs, and the blood will then be carried back to the left side of the heart. Now, a good rule of thumb is that veins return blood to the heart. So these then would be called the pulmonary veins. Okay, so the right and left pulmonary veins are going to carry oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the left atrium. From the left atrium, that blood will pass through the mitral or bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, blood will pass through the aortic valve into the first ascending aorta, then the arch of the aorta, then the descending aorta, and from there the oxygenated blood will go out to all body systems.